Hear now the word of the Lord. He came down with them, and he stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured, and everyone in the crowd was trying to touch him. For power came out of him and healed all of them. And then he looked up at his disciples and he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven. But that is how their ancestors treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." Word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Who do you trust? So I want you to just take a moment and think of all the people in your life. It doesn't have to be close people to you. But who are the persons you trust the most is the question. So be thinking of some names. Because I think most likely every single person that passes through your mind right now was someone who gave you a reason to trust them over time. It could be someone you've had a very long and close relationship with, a spouse, children, family members. It could be someone you work with who's earned your trust at work. It could be a business person that you've hired to assist you with something. You're a mechanic. Important to have a mechanic you can trust. A contractor who's earned your trust. Your doctor. I had neck surgery about 4 years ago. It was my second one. And I had only seen, this was when we were living in Biloxi, Mississippi, or near Biloxi. And I had only seen the doctor who performed my surgery 2 or 3 times before he started cutting into me. Now, how did I come to trust this doctor? Excuse me. Well, I asked around. I checked his Google reviews, and I checked his health grade. I asked other doctors and nurses. I asked my physical therapist. I checked with the doctor in my church who had had the same surgery to see if my surgeon said all the right things. I checked his credentials, and I trusted my gut. I've told people before, and this is true for me, I don't know if it's true for you, but I think the worst part of having surgery is going under. When you're lying on that table, and the anesthesiologist puts that mask on you, think about it. You are in full submission. You are in complete and full submission to the people standing over you, especially the one with the scalpel. In that moment, you must trust the ones who are trying to make you better. You have no choice at that point. I guess you could pop off the table, but by then they've given you the truth serum, and so you can't leave. Think of all the people, though, that I had to trust so that I could trust my surgeon. To some extent, I had to trust the teachers who taught my surgeon from pre-K all the way to residency. I had to trust the administrators of all the schools that surgeon attended to ensure that the right teachers had been hired. I had to trust the writers of the textbooks he used. I had to trust the same of every nurse, every therapist, any assistant who helped plan and implement my surgery. I had to trust the administrators of the medical facility where I had my surgery that they made a good hire. I had to trust those who prepped the surgery area to ensure that it was sanitized to the fullest extent so that I was being operated on in a safe environment. I had to trust the makers of the medical tools and the equipment used to perform the surgery, that it was good equipment and wouldn't fail. And right before my surgery, this young man came into my room with a thick Cajun accent. He had gotten up at 3 in the morning to make the 3-hour drive from Baton Rouge, Louisiana to Biloxi, Mississippi. This young man came into my room and he said, I have one job today. I am to watch your nerves. As the doctor operates on you, I have to watch your nerves to make sure that the surgeon doesn't make a wrong move and leave you paralyzed. Y'all, he was so young. He was really young. And he had this big, thick Cajun accent. I shouldn't say this about Louisianans, but Mississippians and Louisianans have a real rivalry. But it's hard to sound smart with a big, thick Cajun accent. He was so young, and he got up and made a 3-hour drive starting at 3 a.m. in the morning. And it's a pretty important job that he had, and I had to trust him. It illustrates how central the act of trust is in our everyday life. Just getting in the car, you have to trust a whole lot of people to keep you safe. From the engineers and manufacturers of the car to other people on the road. But Jeremiah tells us in our opening verse today, this is what Jeremiah says. He says, "Cursed are those who trust in mere mortals and make mere flesh their strength." All those people that I mentioned, all the people you trust can and will let you down at some point. No one here has not been let down at some point by someone you trust. It's going to happen. It has happened, even by the ones you trust the most. Today's gospel reading is a difficult gospel reading. But a lot of what Jesus is talking about in the reading today is trust. The difference between the blessed and the woes in the reading today is about where you put your trust. Jesus says today in our reading, he says, "Woe to you who are rich." Why does he say that? Because you put your trust in wealth and possessions. He says, "Woe to you who are full," because you put your trust in the things that satisfy your own flesh. Woe to you who trust your own strength so much that you look down on others who don't have what you have. He says, "Woe to you who put your trust in all the praise that others give you." He is echoing this opening verse from Jeremiah when he says, "Cursed are those who trust in mere humans, because they will be like a shrub in the desert and not see relief when it comes." People who put their trust only in human strength will not know what to do when it comes crashing down. They won't know how to get relief because they placed all their trust in their own flesh and the strength of others even. The Tower of Babel, the Garden of Eden, Judas' betrayal of Jesus, all great examples of how humans put their trust in the strength of humanity over God. I don't know if you remember the story of Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts, but this is an important story. The context for that story is that the early church, the early Christians, placed ultimate trust in each other. The early Christians gave up all their wealth and possessions to the church, and the church distributed to people as they needed it. And that's ultimate trust. Barnabas sold all his land and gave it to the church, but so did Ananias and Sapphira. They sold their land too, but do you remember what they did? They held a little bit back. Just in case the church thing doesn't work out. We're just going to hold a little bit back. The difference between Barnabas and Ananias and Sapphira is the level of trust. Barnabas had complete trust. Ananias and Sapphira didn't, and they came crashing down. And all of these biblical examples teach us that when you trust only in human strength, you're going to crash and burn when that trust fails you. Jeremiah says you have to get your trust right. He says, "Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord." And Jesus tells us today in Luke, he says, if you trust in the Lord, you are blessed, even if you're hungry. If you trust in the Lord, you are blessed, even if you're weeping. If you trust in the Lord, you're blessed, even if people hate you. If you trust in the Lord, you're blessed, even if sickness and disease ravage your body. You are blessed if you trust in the Lord. And when we are enduring any of these life tragedies, it doesn't feel like we are blessed. It feels like we're cursed, in fact. when we go through these kind of tragedies. But let me tell you something. The happiest people I know still count themselves blessed, even when life beats them down. Jesus says we can rejoice during tragedy. That's a hard thing to do. Paul calls us to rejoice in our sufferings because he says the sufferings of this present time, they don't compare to the glory that's coming. In 1 Peter, he calls us to rejoice in our suffering so that we can rejoice when glory is revealed. And James says, count it all joy when we suffer. We rejoice in suffering because we trust in the Lord. And Jeremiah says in verse 8 that trust in the Lord will make you like a tree planted by the water. Hear this. If you put your trust in the Lord, you won't need to fear or be anxious about losing wealth and possessions or the way of life you're accustomed to. If you put your trust in the Lord, you won't need to fear or be anxious when you are hungry. If you put your trust in the Lord, you won't need to fear or be anxious when you're weeping. If you put your trust in the Lord, you won't need to fear or be anxious when you are hated. If you put your trust in the Lord, you won't need to fear or be anxious about the state of things in the country or the world, especially when they're not going the way you want them to go. But please don't get me wrong. As I say all of that, don't get me wrong. In any of these situations, you may still feel anxious. You may still feel afraid. That's normal. It's understandable. But you don't need to. Because you can trust, we can all trust that God will have our back in the end. And what a great witness it is to others when during life's tragedy, people see in Christians a quiet confidence that all will be well. I think we underestimate the power of that witness, especially in a country where there's growing hostility and division. And I think, unfortunately, Christians have played a big part in fueling hostility and division and fear. And I think the reason is that we don't trust God enough. We don't trust God enough. We often talk as Christians about the world as a dark place. I hear Christians say the world's dark and it's getting darker. When we do that, when we think that way, we give voice to darkness. We don't think we are, but we're giving voice to darkness when we see the world as a dark place. There is darkness in the world, make no mistake. But it's also God's world. This is God's world, and this world is full of God's glory. This world has more of God's glory in it than it does darkness. So why ever give voice to darkness and fear? Why ever give voice to it? Why not give voice to God's glory instead? Why give voice to fear? Why give voice to negativity? Why not give voice only to God's glory? Why not give voice only to God's care for us in times of trouble? Studies have shown that the human mind absorbs negativity 7 times more easily than it does positivity. And you wonder why the media gives you the bad news first. We absorb negativity 7 times more. And we also know this, language is the most powerful carrier of negativity. Thinking about our struggles, thinking about the darkness, thinking about our fears affects us. But it affects us 10 times more when we verbalize it. And if it comes out of our mouth, if what comes out of our mouth is negative, it could be 7 times more on top of that. I don't know if you remember Bill Buckner. Does anybody remember that name, Bill Buckner? So, Bill Buckner was the first baseman for the New York Mets in the 1980s. They played in the World Series. And the Red Sox had not won the World Series since 1918. So the whole of Boston, the whole Northeast that pulled for Boston were just anxious for the Red Sox to win a World Series finally. I think 1918, when they won it then, I think Babe Ruth was playing for them then. So, Bill Buckner, you remember what he's famous for? He let a ball go through his leg, and the Mets won, and the Mets won the World Series. He is the most notorious scapegoat in all of sports history, for a while anyway. 19 days before that game, Bill Buckner was being interviewed. And this is what he said in the interview. He said, the dream is you're going to have a great World Series and you're going to win it all. That's the dream. He says the nightmare is that you'll let the winning run roll through your leg and lose the series. 19 days before he let that ball roll through his leg. Buckner gave voice to the negativity, and it came true. I think we too often eat and drink and give voice to fear and darkness, and at its heart, it's a failure of trust. The business model of today's 24-hour news cycle on the internet and TV, the business model is to make you mad, scared, or preferably both. They want you to think the world's going to end if the person you don't like wins an election. They want you to think there are kidnappers waiting around every corner to steal your children, and it keeps you watching. It keeps us watching. It also bombards us with negative thoughts and helps us to generate our own negative thoughts. I think this is one of the biggest reasons there's such division in our society right now. And if you listen to Christian news, it's not much better. And I got to wonder, how can a people who claim that they trust in the Lord, how can a people consume so much fear and darkness turn it off? Turn it off. I mean, turn off the negativity, turn off the fear, stop clicking on fear links and outrageous headlines, hit delete before you read those forwarded emails meant to strike fear and outrage in you. Unfollow the negativity on social media. And when leaders use fear and negativity to get you to pay attention, don't. And by all means, we need to stop giving voice to it. Because when we give voice to the darkness, that's when it takes hold of us. Trust in the Lord instead. Give voice to His glory and His providence instead. When you are in fear and when you are tempted to give voice to darkness, I want you to pray this line. It's Psalm 56:11, which I had the kids do with me. I trust in God. I won't be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Psalm 56:11. Write it down and use it as your mantra anytime you fear or have anxiety. I trust in God. I won't be afraid. What can anyone do to me? Because fear and anxiety, it does not suit the people of God, but trust in the Lord does. Trust in the Lord does. And if we truly trust Him, we do not have to give fear and darkness a voice. All we need to do is trust. Trust and obey, as the song we're about to sing says. Trust and obey. That's all God expects of us, is to trust and obey. For there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. The three traditional practices of Lent to help us to focus on Christ's cross and His sacrifice for us are prayer, fasting, and giving to the poor. That is, for eons, that has been the three primary focuses during Lent. And so I want to give you a challenge for each one of them as we approach Lent. The first one is prayer. So my challenge for you this Lent is to add a little something to your prayer life. So I'm gonna challenge you to pray the Psalms. Just start with Psalm 1 and pray one every day. Now, you won't get through all 150 Psalms because Lent's only 40 days, and that's okay. But hopefully, you'll have built a habit that you'll pray the Psalms every day and then lather, rinse, and repeat. The reason I think this is important, as I've said before, the Psalms are Jesus. They were Jesus' prayer book. Those are the prayers that He used in His own spiritual life. It is why, I've said before, why I put a psalter in our worship service, because I think there needs to be this moment in worship where we're not just reading responsively, but we're praying as Jesus prayed. And so I want to encourage you to just take a psalm a day and use it as your prayer. Fair warning, as you know, from reading them here, some of these psalms can be kind of graphic. The thing about the Psalms is that the writer of the Psalms, the prayer of the Psalms, didn't hold back. If he wanted God to smite his enemies, he prayed for God to smite his enemies. Now, that's not a prayer I'm really comfortable with, especially when Jesus says, love your enemies. But the point of the Psalms were we take everything to God. Even the things like that, we take everything to God and allow God to redeem them. Because if we don't take them to God, how can God redeem them? So I'm going to challenge you to pray a psalm a day. Fasting. Fasting isn't just this drudgery where we take away something because we're supposed to like hang on the cross or something with Jesus. Fasting is a way to free space. It is in us for God to fill. So we give something up. And it's a part of positive growth toward the Lord. There's a weight loss saying that says nothing tastes as good as thin feels. Sometimes I wonder about that one because there are a lot of things that taste really, really good. But that's how we should approach fasting, is that in a sense that we take away something, we give something up that is a challenge for us so that we can free space for God, because nothing feels as good as God dwelling in our hearts. And so it could be a type of food, it could be alcohol, it could be TV, internet, social media. We do all that. We pick something to give up because it makes us better disciples. And also, back here, I have these 22 questions for daily self-examination. Some of you have taken some, but these are great to use during Lent. And so I want to encourage you, they're out there near where the bulletins are, to use those. And the last thing, giving to the poor. I just encourage you, find a way to give to the poor. I'm sure all of you are in some way giving to the poor. But find a way that you can do that that's intentional during Lent. So prayer, fasting, giving to the poor, that's my challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for me, my family, to do that, and that we might have a holy Lent.